Medical, legal, and ethical issues. This covers a lot of information that's going to be vital to you mastering. Understanding probably is a better word to use. It is still part of the preparatory module. We're going to talk about consent and refusal of care, confidentiality, advanced directives called do not resuscitate orders, out of hospital do not resuscitate, or DNRs, torts and criminals, evidence preservation, statutory responsibility, mandatory reporting, ethics and morals, and end-of-life issues. So a lot of material in here. And again, I want to emphasize that all of us that are involved in teaching this class, whether there be at your facility, people that you'll be writing out with as you start to learn the job itself, we wouldn't be doing this if we were afraid we were going to lose our house and our bank account and our dog get sued from doing this. But the biggest thing that I want to impart to you is you need to do no harm, practice your care in good faith, meaning that this is what you were taught and it's in the best interest of your patient, based on what you learned. Not so much what you saw on Discovery Channel last night, but what you learned. And you'll be surprised. Consistent and compassionate care, a lot of times I've seen physicians where the family comes back and says, yeah, you misdiagnosed my mother, but you're such a nice doctor, we're not going to sue you. And that compassion goes a long way. I've seen nurses that were just excellent at their skills. I mean, if you had to go to the ER, that's the nurse you would want there. They were hard to work with, just not happy people, and got the most complaints. And the little grandmotherly type nurse that wasn't very good at her skills, she was competent, just not the go-to person, because she was very nice, had very few complaints. So that compassion goes a long way in protecting you from medical legal disputes. Primarily, we're going to go over topics that we have to know to protect ourselves, but when you get involved in a medical legal dispute, it's probably a motor vehicle crash that you have to go do a deposition for or show up in court for. I've been subpoenaed. I've had to testify on murder trials and domestic abuse and car accidents and those kind of things. And I was never accused of anything, but I had to get the facts straight. And most of these come up like 2 years after the incident. So you have to have also really good documentation because you won't remember everything. So the first of our topics that we're going to go over is that duty to act. It needs to be contractual and formal, meaning that you're on duty, you're on call, you have a contract, and what we call that is a duty to act. So because of that, you have to proceed to the scene, render emergency care within your scope of practice or scope of care, not above, always within your scope of care. There's a story I tell about two Houston paramedics that are no longer paramedics, are no longer working with Houston Fire. They went to a motor vehicle crash and the woman was decapitated, so they were kind of like, okay, well, we're not going to care for her. Her head was in the back seat of the car, but when they opened the door, able to open it with tools, they saw that she was very pregnant, and one of them put their hand on her abdomen and felt a kick. She was 8 months pregnant, and the baby had kicked. The baby was still alive. So without calling medical control, they took the scalpel and cut the baby out, took the baby to the hospital. She lived several hours. She probably wouldn't have lived anyway. That wasn't the point. They were never trained how to do an emergency C-section. They did it outside their scope of care. So point I'm trying to make here is if you stay within what you're taught in class and do it to the best interest of the patient, you're not going to be in trouble for anything that you do. Most of us, if we do have failure to acts at all, it's acts of omission rather than commission. So looking at this scene, do you think that person needs to be removed from that vehicle and with their neck immobilized, so in the event they had any spinal cord injury, they don't have any long-term paralysis from it? We would all agree yes, they need to at least have the neck immobilized. So you get there and the patient's standing outside the car and they're like, yeah, my neck and back hurt, but your neck and back hurt too. You've been lifting a lot of heavy patients. So you say, well, I'll walk on over here to the ambulance. Well, that's an act of omission. You didn't do what another EMR would have done in that same situation. And we call that the standard of care. It's a manner in which you must act or behave. Treat them to the best of your ability in a reasonable way that similar training another prudent, reasonable person would have done. The scope of care is determined by your curriculum, your Department of Transportation standards, also your medical director, those protocols or standing orders, that offline medical control, and any online. Hey doc, I've got a situation here, I want to run this past you. The scope of care. Now, going back to those two Houston paramedics, had they called the receiving hospital and said, look, I did an orientation through a cadaver lab, I'm pretty sure I can do this, and the doctor said yes, then that physician gave them permission to act at that scope of care, they would have been okay. Ethics, so we're going to talk about ethics and morals and legals and everything else. So ethics, you want to stay competent in what you do, up to date on your skills and knowledge. You want to evaluate your own performance. Hey, how fast did we get out? Well, we got the call at 3 in the morning and I really needed a cigarette, so I walked very slowly to the ambulance and I smoked half a cigarette all the way. No, you delayed the response time. So all these things you want to kind of self-evaluate. It's always better to come up with some way of correcting yourself rather than somebody else doing it. And a lot of these are based on expectations in your organization and within the industry itself. Making sure your records are complete and done at an appropriate time. I hear stories all the time about nursing staff say, it took 3 or 4 days to get the report. I'm like, that's just crazy. We have the ability to fax reports. We don't have to stay on scene or stay at the hospital and generate this report. So, that can be an issue. Don't alter reports. There's ways we have of doing it. You can write an addendum if it's a computer-generated report. If it's still a handwritten report, you draw one line through it, you initial it, and time it. Tell them what time you came up with that. You don't blacken out something, I don't want them to see that I can't spell. That's okay. We all can't spell. We get better with time. Consent's a big one. You don't ever want to falsely imprison or kidnap your patient. So you don't just assume that one person's in the house, they've called 911, you get there and you're starting to drag them to the ambulance. They may not want to go with you. They may just want to be checked out. So when we get there, well, actually, with our wake patients, it wouldn't be much fun with somebody who's unresponsive to walk up to them and say this, hey, I'm Susie with EMS. What's your name? What seems to be the problem today? Introduce yourself. Get consent. Can I help you? When they say yes, that's express consent or actual consent. So they have to be of legal age and able to make that rational decision. This is where it gets really gray. Somebody under the effects of alcohol or drugs or a head injury or low blood sugar may not be able to make that rational decision. And we'll talk about situations that arise that you'll have to make those decisions. Implied consent is where the patient cannot answer for himself or herself. And so they're unresponsive and you think, I'm going to treat them on the implication that if they could say, yes, please help me, they would. And that's what we base it on as an industry. If they're unresponsive, we help that patient. Minors are not considered capable of speaking for themselves, so if it's life over limb, meaning that, you have a girl that passes out at a pep rally. She's 16 years old. Who knows what the cause was? Maybe she didn't eat today. Who knows? She cannot consent for herself, nor can she refuse for herself. But that incident is not life-threatening. She's awake now, color's back. It's not life-threatening. You want to make sure you get consent from the parent or guardian before you transport them. You don't want the parents coming to the school and then being told, oh yeah, they took off with them, and it's not really that life-threatening. Versus it is, you make that judgment of, listen, the time it takes to wait for the parents, it's too much time. And you can get consent over the phone. So kind of what we talked about, if permission cannot be obtained, start giving care, especially if it's something that's going to continue to be painful or be something that affects the breathing, circulation, something that we would call life-threatening. Consider mentally ill patients have the same thing. They're not able to answer for themselves, so whoever their guardian is, needs to be involved. And what we like to do is bring law enforcement into all these situations where it's unsure. Not that they're going to handcuff him and arrest him and make him go, but that we're all on the same side. Because what you want to err on is the need for care of this patient because he or she was at risk to himself or others, or at risk of deteriorating, was much higher than me getting consent. And have that law enforcement person there to help you make that decision where you're all on the same team. If you had to go to court and testify, why did you take the 6-year-old from his home? He fell off the bed and broke his arm. You could have waited for the parents. You know, you have that other professional there that kind of looks at it through other eyes. I threw in this slide here because in Texas, you can treat minors under the age of 18. In Texas, is 18 is an adult, 17 and 364 days is a minor. If they're emancipated, which means they're runaways, they're legally not living at home, they can consent for themselves. If they're in the military, parents have to sign that they joined before their 18th birthday. They can answer for themselves. If they're married but a minor, they can answer for themselves. If the girl's pregnant, she can answer for herself. She's now considered an adult. But check this out. Once a baby's born, if the girl is not 18 and she still lives at home with her parents or guardian, she's a minor again. She can consent for her baby, but she can't consent for herself. She's not emancipated. She's not married. She's not pregnant anymore. Therefore, she can only consent for her baby, not herself. Gets a little weird, doesn't it? Patient has the right to refuse care. If they're mentally in control, it may not be in their best interest, but they have the right to refuse. I don't want to go with you. I don't want to wear that cervical collar. I don't want you to splint my arm. I don't want the ice pack. They can tell you whatever it is that they refuse. Now, it may not be in their best interest, so you always want to come up with, well, how about we try this or whatever. You want to be able to convey to them the risk versus the benefit. This is what could happen if you don't come. And I usually end it with, look, sir, if you were my father, I'd really, really recommend that you go. I don't know what's wrong with you. I don't have a lab. I don't have a CT machine. I don't have everything to diagnose you. And I don't even have the experience and the training to do that. You need to go to somebody else that can. But I really think you should go. And sometimes people will say, yeah, I don't think I need to go to the hospital. And you're like, yeah, I don't think you do either. I think you're fine. And that's great. Everybody's on the same page. Those are really nice. Make sure you get a real good refusal. Make sure they sign it and somebody witnesses it. But let me tell you this. At the BLS level, this is your highest chance of getting in trouble, is patient refusal. The documentation for a patient refusal needs to be twice as long as if you transported the patient. You need to write everything that you can, because the next day or later that night or whatever, the family calls back and that person stopped breathing. I guarantee there's going to be an inquisition onto what all happened. And you want to see that signature. And I stayed on scene for 30 minutes with this person, not 2 minutes. You got there, I don't want to go, sign here. Don't call us back. No, that's not good quality care. So make sure you spend some time with them. Try to talk them into coming and document all of that. People with advanced directives. It's a document that says, it's a living will. It's a written document that says, if I should stop breathing or my heart should stop beating, I don't want any heroic measures. There's forms for Texas for this. The physician signs it. People can actually pick out what they want done, but for the most part, skills that will not perform are compressions, ventilations, AED, shocking, but you can still give them oxygen. They have to suck it in, keep them warm, hold their hand, talk to them. It's not that people want to die, it's just that when their heart stops, they don't want any heroic measures. So until that heart stops, until they stop breathing, their DNR is not really coming into play. But just some things to think about. Let's go ahead and wrap up part 1 of this here.